Was she ever real? You ask yourself this each night when your tiredness distorts her eyes and suddenly she feels impossible. Perhaps this is grief, you reason. The realities of unanswered questions, stolen possibilities. But you twist. Was she ever really here? And if she wasn't here, how could she be gone? You inhale quickly, holding your breath in a desperate attempt to conjure her as you once did. Draw together light and shadow, the texture of delicate lace. Manifest her physicality beside you. You paint her lips, the curve of her cheek, the dark curl tucked behind her ear. Perhaps you even catch her scent in the air. But when you reach the eyes, that's when she fades. For their color was indescribable, forever changing as quickly as she did, existing in the undefined in between, just as she did. Was she ever real? She takes your mind in circles. This is Mirrors, a collection of horrors, history, and hauntings. I'm your host, Gabby. Here on the season 2 finale, I welcome you to the scene of the crime, a house of mystery and murder, the Lizzie Borden House. Before we jump into the episode, a few housekeeping things. First of all, be sure to follow the show on socials if you're not already. You can find me at Mirrors Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and that way you'll be able to see any updates about new episodes moving forward. In the meantime, I'll be posting lots of paranormal content and using those spaces to document my life and investigations here in Gettysburg. This Friday, I'll be posting a vlog from the Lizzie Borden House, including moments of my investigations. So if you want more, check that out. Again, this Friday, it'll drop at 11:11 a.m. I'm posting longer form paranormal video content on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Now, a very exciting announcement. I am designing merch. I'll link to the website in the episode description. There's some stickers on there available for purchase if you're interested, but lots more coming soon, and I can't wait to show you what I've been working on. So that's something to look forward to in my little hiatus. Finally, if you wish to support me, I am on Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform to help creatives fund their work. I'll have it linked as well so you can find more info there. But yeah, that would be a huge help as I plan new episodes and work to be the best podcaster I can be. Okay, this is the last thing. I just wanted to say thank you. I've loved this season, but specifically the last 3 weeks delving into the Lizzie Borden house, like getting to research this case and write the scripts, and then bring the stories to you has been so much fun and so creatively inspiring for me. I just can't express like how much it means to me that I get to go to these places that I've dreamt of going to for as long as I can remember. And then to have a place to share my experiences and tell you about everything I learned. It's just something I will never take for granted. And I honor that. So just thank you for being here, for listening, for obsessing over all things spooky with me. It's the gift of a lifetime. So thank you. All right, here we go. The last 3 weeks, we've discussed the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden, widely believed to be committed by Lizzie Borden. These murders were unprecedented in Fall River, Massachusetts, both because of their gruesome nature and the seemingly unanswerable questions that left this case unsolved. At the end of part 2, I left you with the acquittal of Lizzie Borden. That's right, she never was actually convicted of murder, despite the fact that her reputation has kind of lived on as this infamous axe murderer. Be sure to check out part 1 and 2 if you haven't yet. There's so much to this story, and I don't want you to miss anything. Today's episode is all about the hauntings of this house. As you know, season 2 has been exploring the most haunted locations of New England. Researching and visiting each spot was all leading up to this moment, investigating the Lizzie Borden House. I guess all of my interactions with the paranormal have led me here, teaching me to remain open and embrace my connection to spirit. That's the whole concept of mirrors, exploring haunted places, the physical spaces that reflect the past and twist the present, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. And let me tell you, if any place is a mirror, a portal to the other side, it's the Lizzie Borden House. I'm sure it's no surprise to you that instead of a normal bucket list, I have a paranormal bucket list. Haunted places I absolutely have to visit before I too become a ghost, and it's not so much of a mystery anymore. Well, the Lizzie Borden House has been at the top of that list for a long time. I'm obsessed with true crime, especially historic cases like this one that have so many possibilities. And even when it feels like something makes sense, there's still more questions that come up. It's like a puzzle where there's always pieces that never really fit right. The Borden murders in particular are unique because their extensive media coverage at the time has left them pretty thoroughly documented. Also, the scene of the crime still stands, appearing as it would have back in 1892, open for visitors and overnight guests. I booked a night in the Andrew and Abby suite, which, although it's not where any of the murders occurred, it is known to be one of the most active spots in the house. I'll preface this by saying that being in the house was so surreal. From learning more about the case and all the intricate details, to hearing about the Borden's lives beyond the murders, I became so invested in this story. I truly haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I visited on November 13th. And the paranormal activity I encountered was wild. I had no idea what to expect, and I certainly didn't go into it thinking I was going to be having my most active investigation yet. But that's exactly what happened. Before we get to all the paranormal, I wanted to talk about Lizzie's life after the murders and trial. She spent her entire life in Fall River, becoming a kind of elusive figure in town. She actually changed her name to Lisbeth to separate herself, in a sense, from the murders, although her reputation was forever stained. Many people still believed she was guilty, and she was pretty much ostracized. She tried to stay active within the church community that she'd been a part of her whole life, but she was practically shunned. It didn't help that in 1897, she was once again caught shoplifting from a department store in Providence, Rhode Island. What can I say? The girl liked an adrenaline rush. So she really created her own little world in Fall River. She and Emma purchased a Victorian mansion, which they named Maplecroft. This was in the high-class neighborhood known as the Hill, where Lizzie and Emma had always wanted to live. Despite being widely hated and ignored, Lisbeth did have a small group of friends, for which she threw lavish parties at Maplecroft. She had a love for art and the theater, which facilitated her friendship with actress Nance O'Neill. Some speculate that Lizzie was actually a lesbian and the two had a romantic relationship. Although there isn't any official documentation to prove this, she had dogs at Maplecroft and had a really strong love for animals, even making frequent donations to local charities and shelters. After 12 years of living together, Emma ended up moving to New Hampshire. The sisters seemed to have some sort of falling out and ended up never speaking again. No one really knows what happened between them, although, of course, many wonder if the murders had anything to do with this. They had always seemed really close, so just to think of the fact that one day they separated and never spoke again, it does obviously bring up a lot of questions about what happened. On June 1st, 1927, Lisbeth Borden died of pneumonia. It's said that the exact day of Lizzie's death, Emma fell and broke her hip, contributing to her declining health, and she then died just 9 days after Lizzie. I honestly don't believe Lizzie Borden haunts the Lizzie Borden house. I think she visits. I even heard a story of a guide seeing a very detailed female apparition appearing to be Lizzie out behind the house. But if her spirit is anywhere, I think she'd be at Maplecroft, where she finally got to live out the life of luxury she craved, and where she created her own little safe haven within a town that no longer welcomed her. The Lizzie Borden house is undoubtedly haunted, though. I just think there's another spirit who wants to be heard and seen, and that's Abby Borden. That's right, I fully believe I made contact with Abby Borden. I was open to any paranormal activity, but I honestly didn't expect anything to happen. If you've never done a paranormal investigation, I'll give you some insider information. It's not at all like it seems it would be. For example, like TV shows. They're investigating for hours or days, possibly even weeks at a time, cutting together the highlight reel to keep it engaging. So it looks like something is constantly happening, whether that's equipment going off, hearing unexplained noises, or even like seeing a shadow figure. When you're actually doing a ghost hunt, you're mostly sitting in the dark for hours on end, asking questions into the abyss, and internally questioning what you're doing with your life. The reality is that a lot of times nothing really happens. And if it does, it's not as obvious as you'd think. Now, you do get those magic moments in magic places where the chemistry is just right and the spirits are feeling talkative. So, when I'm going to a new place and I'm only going to be there for a night, I try to manage expectations. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences, mostly in Gettysburg, but that's a few stories out of hundreds of times visiting the town. And now I live here, so I'm on the battlefield every day in some capacity. There's something to that. Being in the same place repeatedly over time and getting to observe its energy changing. That and the ghost of Gettysburg are probably like, oh my god, this bitch again. Let's do something so she goes away. All that is to say, the Lizzie Borden house surprised me. When I first arrived, I did a history tour, which was seriously a highlight of my visit. Shout out to my tour guide, Elena, who's been listening to the pod as well. So thank you so much for the amazing tour. The way the Lizzie Borden story was told really helped me align with the home. Like I said, I just became so enamored with the case. After the tour, I was left alone in the house for a bit before the other overnight guests arrived. I started my initial investigation, introducing myself to the house, stating my intentions for why I was there, and setting up some equipment. I wanted to start off focusing around the spot where Mr. Borden was killed. The current owners have bloody mannequins where Andrew and Abby's bodies would have been. And although I'm not sure how I feel about that, it certainly could stir up some energy. It was also a physical reminder that someone was brutally murdered in the exact spot that you're standing. Just an interesting thought I had comparing this investigation to those I've done in Gettysburg. Something I really wrestle with about Gettysburg is this persistent battle between peace and horror. I feel like the energy of the battlefield is transient between those two emotions to the point where it sometimes feels unnaturally calm and quiet, which makes it one of my favorite places in the world. I mean, I love just getting out there and being present, being in nature. It's so peaceful, but it's so easy to forget what happened there. Whereas the Lizzie Borden house really places you at the scene of the crime, physically and energetically, which, as an investigator, facilitated this new level of focus. Immediately, I was ready to jump in and start communicating. Again, I'll be putting on a video if you actually want to see these things happening rather than just me telling you about them. But some interesting activity happened during this part of the investigation. I had a tracer light in front of the couch, which is not the original couch, but it is a replica in the exact spot where Mr. Borden was killed. And remember, he was killed while laying down on the couch. So, with the tracer light, the light turns on and detects motion as someone walks alongside it. It can also detect temperature changes, which it did multiple times in front of the couch. I also placed an EMF detector on the mannequin right near the head, which is where Mr. Borden sustained most of his injuries. The EMF detector, which detects changes in electromagnetic energy, spiked a few times as well. Although I don't place all my faith in these devices, I do think it's cool that there was activity around the couch. Many have reported cold spots, disembodied sighs and whispers, shadow figures, and even unexplained impressions like someone is sitting down on the couch. So, it is believed to be a center of residual energy in the home. And I will say, I was careful to keep cameras, phones, and anything else that could trigger equipment far enough away that it wouldn't impact anything. And for the most part, these two devices did not go off at all the rest of the night. So, to me, that makes it seem like the spikes detected were not random. Then the other guests arrived, a mom and her daughter, both really interested in the paranormal but had not done an official investigation before. They were like the perfect people I could have been with because they immediately sat down beside me and wanted to get started investigating. I spent some time explaining each device to them and showing them how they work. I think there's something to that too. I honestly had never had so much activity with multiple devices. Usually it's like one is fairly active or everything is quiet. Perhaps taking time to talk about the equipment gave the spirits a tutorial in a way, showing them how we would be able to recognize their communication. The coolest evidence we got, in my opinion, was with the REM pod. The REM pod creates a small, localized electromagnetic energy field, and it lights up when it detects changes in that field. So, temperature changes and physical touch can make it go off. This has never gone off for me. Like, it's so rare that I never even really make it a main point of focus in my investigations. I usually just kind of like put it out and, like, okay, it's there if anything happens. But the REM pod went off a few times this night. Not so many that it seemed to be some sort of device malfunction. Specifically, it went off 3 times. Only when we mentioned an alternate theory to the Lizzie Borden murders. Here's an audio clip so you know what I'm talking about. I think that this location, more than any other that I've been to, there's just so many unanswered questions. There's different opinions on what was used for the actual murder weapon. It's, widely known to be an axe, but that might not be the case. It could have been a hatchet. It could have been a hot poker. It could have been something else entirely. So there's questions around that. There's obviously questions around who the murderer was. Many people believe it to be Lizzie Borden, but there's also theories that it's Uncle John, or it could be someone else. Oh. Okay. That was interesting timing for that one. Okay, so more on these alternate theories. Of course, there's the possibility of an intruder, someone who wasn't connected to the family but would have had some motivation to murder. The police were able to determine there was no sign of forced entry. And with the house's layout, it's hard to believe someone could have slipped in and out, committing 2 gruesome murders. Also, remember, Lizzie and Bridget, both confirmed to be at the house during the murders, didn't hear anything. And no blood trail, no bloody footsteps, no mess really at all. So, an outsider, although not out of the realm of possibility, just seems so unlikely. There's the theory that Bridget Sullivan, the Borden's maid, did it. Pretty much anyone who had direct contact with the Bordens around the time of the murders has been implicated in some way throughout history. People have looked to Bridget because of her alleged unhappiness while working for the Bordens. There was a bias against her because of her Irish roots and the obvious class differences. So it's likely Bridget was mistreated to some degree, although she denied this when giving her testimony during the trial. Still, some believe that she just snapped one day, committing these murders in a fit of rage. Again, I guess not impossible, but I don't think that's what happened. Lizzie was there. Surely she would have heard or seen something, or would have said something during the investigation if she thought Bridget was even remotely capable of committing murder. After all, this was Lizzie's father and stepmother. If she thought the maid killed them, she would have made that known. Alright, now John Morse, the mysterious man who rolled into Fall River unexpectedly on August 3rd, the day before the murders. John was Lizzie and Emma's uncle on their mother's side, and he wanted to discuss business with Andrew. Now, I know what you're thinking, he wasn't at the house during the murders. So clearly, he didn't do it. Plus, he had that alibi. He was visiting relatives in town. It was the perfect alibi. Perhaps too perfect. His timing was perfect, too, for he arrived back at the house right after the murders, making it clear to the police that were there that he didn't do it. Suspicion arose, though, as he, like Lizzie, seemed fairly unemotional and not at all surprised about what happened. And while his alibi did rule him out as a suspect, it was suspiciously specific. John was able to recall the number of the streetcar he rode on that day, the conductor's name and badge number. He also provided a nearly minute-to-minute account of his morning, including his conversations with 6 Irish priests on the streetcar. He had all their names as well, and he made sure to introduce himself and let them know where he was going and what he was up to, perhaps so they could support his alibi. Could he just have a good memory? Maybe, but I don't, it seems so strange to me that he remembered all of that and was able to recall it at the drop of a hat when there's all of this going on around him. Like, I don't know. It just seems a little off to me. Honestly, if you were to ask me, I think the truth lies somewhere between everything we've discussed. And with how everything worked out, the little mess left, how fast everything happened, the lack of physical evidence, I think multiple people were involved. John Morse's alibi could have been crafted and acted out to ensure he was not implicated. Emma was out of town, maybe even intentionally because she knew what was going on at home. Lizzie, if she was the murderer, was able to appear before investigators with not a drop of blood on her and not a hair out of place. Of course, there were missteps in how the investigators handled everything. Their mistakes could have made it easier for Lizzie to slip between the cracks. But still, it just seems like it all worked out too well. This theory involves Dr. Bowen as well. Remember, he dismissed Abby's claim that she was poisoned when she went to him, violently ill before the murders. This alleged poisoning was also the reason Lizzie went to her neighbor, Alice Russell, saying she feared for her family's lives due to the father's shady business dealings. Stick with me. Was all of this some sort of elaborate cover up for an actual poisoning done by Lizzie to plant the seed that an outsider did it? Dr. Bowen defended Lizzie on the stand, too, excusing her changing alibis because he gave her morphine, and sedatives after the murders. He was the first to arrive at the scene, too, specifically who Lizzie asked to be there. I don't know, and I certainly don't want to wrongly accuse or implicate anyone who doesn't deserve it. But this is a widely explored theory around the case, and it almost seems to be the most realistic. If Lizzie was guilty, I just can't imagine she acted alone. The question still remains, even if that is what happened, why? To go along with this theory, I think the core of it is Andrew Borden's wealth and Lizzie and Emma's anger over the property transfers to Abby. I found a page on the Lizzie Borden Society forum about the inheritance. There is some conflicting information, but here's some takeaways. Abby being killed first was important and possibly intentional, ensuring the Borden girls got everything. Had Andrew died first, Abby would have been entitled to a part of his estate, even if she was murdered right after. That estate then would have gone to her family. In some cases, widows could have even got everything if the father had no sons. Abby dying before Andrew made her portion of the estate irrelevant, and it all went to Lizzie and Emma. On the stand, while defending her sister, Emma said that even though Lizzie had no reason to kill Abby, she certainly had no reason to kill her father. But if we're looking at Lizzie as guilty, it only makes sense that she would have killed her father too. First of all, if Abby died, there was always the chance of him getting married again, putting Lizzie and Emma right back in the same situation. Also, Lizzie could have been actually convicted if her father was alive, knowing where to place the blame for Abby's murder. With the inheritance, Lizzie and Emma purchased Maplecroft. Prior to Lizzie's acquittal, Emma was the sole inheritor and covered Lizzie's legal fees. The house where the murder occurred was eventually sold to a private buyer, evolving over time and becoming the bed and breakfast it is today. I will say, Lizzie and Emma did give money to Abby's family after the murders. Was this a gesture of genuine support, or a way to smooth tensions and publicly save face? Soon after the trial, Bridget Sullivan left Fall River and pretty much disappeared from public view. She moved to Montana, where she would eventually get married and raise a family. Some believe she was paid off to stay quiet, whether that means she was actually involved in the murders or just knew too much. So, back to the investigation. I think it was interesting that the REM pod only went off when I was mentioning these alternate theories. It's unclear which specific theory it was responding to, but if we're taking this as communication from spirit, maybe it just means that we shouldn't take this case at face value. And perhaps there is so much more to this story we'll never know. We then moved our investigation into the dining room, another alleged center of paranormal activity since it was where the autopsies took place. Also, where Lizzie claimed to be ironing handkerchiefs before Abby's murder. Although we didn't have anything happen in this space. In fact, our next few hours were pretty quiet. I decided to put my camera away, and we reset before moving upstairs to the guest room, where John Morris had slept the night of August 3rd, and where Abby Borden was murdered. I placed the REM pod on the center of the bed, which Abby was said to have been making when she was attacked from behind. The tracer light was laid out next to the bed along the mannequin depicting Abby, as I hoped to capture any residual energy of the murderer approaching her. We continued asking questions, addressing specific spirits, but nothing. Until I was telling the other guests about John Morris's weirdly specific alibi. And that REM pod went crazy. This was after probably about 20 minutes of being in the room, all of us sitting on the floor, not moving around. After that, it didn't happen again. And the REM pod didn't go off at all for the rest of the night. In fact, none of our equipment really did. Honestly, this interaction reinforced something I've had happen in many investigations. When I relinquish the pressure for something to happen and just be present, that's when something usually happens, when you least expect it. So, should you find yourself in a haunted house in the near future, just stay open. You never know what might happen. On to the next hotspot. I didn't experience anything in this room, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, given the fact this podcast is called Mirrors. And that's because the front parlor is called the Mirror Room. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't pick these places because they have haunted mirrors. There's just a lot of haunted mirrors, apparently. In this room, there's 2 mirrors that are said to create a portal. In these mirrors, visitors have claimed to see mist, figures, and even the clear apparition of a woman moving toward the front door. Now, up to the 3rd floor. I have to say, the energy of the 3rd floor was totally different than the rest of the house. I got hit with a wave of nausea and dizziness while up there, which after telling my guide, I discovered is actually pretty common with this floor. I even started to get really short of breath and was felt like I was gasping for air. My chest was really tight. It was so strange. This is the floor Bridget Sullivan lived on, keeping her separated from the rest of the family. But that's not why it's haunted. The Hosea Knowlton room, named after the main prosecutor in the case, is said to be haunted because of another lesser known murder that happened next door. A woman named Eliza Darling Borden, said to be Lizzie's great aunt, lived next door with her husband and their 3 children, Maria, Eliza Ann, and an infant named Holder. Eliza Darling, having been lost in a deep internal struggle, took her children to the cellar and left them to drown in a cistern. She then took her own life by slitting her throat. The eldest child, Maria, survived, although the other 2 did drown. And while this happened in the house next door, which today houses a Lizzie Borden themed coffee shop, this tragic event is said to cause the heaviness in the Lizzie Borden attic. There are toys laid out on the floor as well, as many believe to make contact with the children. I put out the REM pod again, as well as my Boo Bear, which works like the EMF, but it is just a stuffed bear. I hoped this would trigger activity with the children, although we still had no more activity with any of our equipment. Although all 3 of us felt off on this floor, which was the only place in the house we had any clear physical reactions like that. It was pretty late at this point, and we hadn't had any communication for a while. So we decided to head to our rooms for the night. The other guests were staying in the Lizzie and Emma room, which is right up against Andrew and Abby's room where I was staying. We left the door between the rooms open for a while, which I am glad we did. I guess I should tell you that earlier in the night, I did something to potentially piss off Andrew Borden. As I've told you, Andrew was very careful with his money. In my room, there is a small bowl of coins and dollar bills. And Andrew is said to get upset if you move the coins. So I did. I pointed a camera at the coins whenever we left the room, which was plugged in. As I was coming back into the room, I noticed the charger's cord was swinging back and forth. Not even like it had been brushed, which still would have been weird since no one had been in the room for a long time. But it was swinging like someone had intentionally pushed against it. When we were going back to the rooms, I went through Lizzie and Emma's room and through that open door. So that's how I noticed this charger moving. And as I'm taking that situation in, I turn around to literally watch the door on the cabinet in Lizzie's room swing open. The cabinet is situated right inside her room, beyond the door to Abby and Andrew's room. One of the guests had been walking toward the doorway, and she saw the cabinet swing open too and kind of gasped and jumped back. I just stood there dumbfounded. I was like, I watched it go from fully shut to swinging open like someone pulled on it really hard. I went into their room as we tried to debunk it. The cabinet had been closed tight. This hadn't happened at all before, and it took some force to get it open, let alone swing it open like it did. I wish I had this on camera because it's so crazy seeing something move on its own like that. And right after noticed the charger was moving. It was like someone was there, either interacting with us and our belongings, or perhaps it was residual energy of someone just moving about, doing the regular tasks they would have done back in the 1890s. We were all in shock and so excited about everything we'd experienced. After talking for a few minutes, I went back into my room to get ready to try to get some sleep. After all, I had to leave early in the morning to get to Salem. So I'm going through my bag, getting out some pajamas and my toothbrush, and I started to walk toward the bathroom. Just as I step into the bathroom, I felt and heard someone rush up on me. There's just that physical, intuitive feeling you get when someone's behind you. I wholeheartedly believed that one of the guests was coming up behind me. And in that split second, I had a rush of excitement, thinking she was coming over to tell me about something else that had happened. I wish I could fully express to you that I seriously thought a real person was coming up behind me. I had no clue what I was turning back to. As I looked back, just for a brief second, I saw an apparition. The first time I saw an apparition, it was on the battlefields in Gettysburg, and it appeared as a real, physical man who was there 1 second and then gone. If he hadn't disappeared, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. He just, looked like skin and bones like any other person would. Earlier this season, I told you about my experience seeing a fox. That too looked like an actual fox. Although it was surrounded with a golden, burning light, as though it was emanating flames. It kind of had this like large aura around it of light, like a spotlight almost. This was different, although kind of an in between. I saw a clear outline that proved this was a woman, and it was sort of like dark and shadowy in between, but the outline was bright gold. The best way I can think to describe it is like a lava lamp, like it was kind of like liquidy, like flowing around the shadow. But just like this super thin outline. And then gone. Immediately, I went to the room next door where both guests were laying down and clearly hadn't been in my room. I told them what I saw and the physical sensation of someone rushing up behind me. And I can't totally explain it, but as I said it out loud, I just knew. That was Abby Borden. I embarked on this New England road trip mainly to go back to Salem and try to understand what I saw all those years ago when that magical fox came to me after a ghost tour. I booked a night at the Lizzie Borden House as a way to challenge myself and gather everything I was learning along the way about communication with spirit. Honestly, after all of this, I only have more questions. What was strangest to me personally, other than the fact that all of this, the charger swinging, the drawer opening, seeing a freaking apparition, happened within a matter of minutes on top of an active investigation, what was strangest was after all that, I brushed my teeth, washed my face, climbed into bed, and had the most restful night of sleep I've had in years. I slept through the whole rest of the night, feeling so at peace when I woke up to the sun falling through the lace curtains. To me, that solidified that I saw Abby, and that she'd been the one in the room moving things around, potentially even setting off our equipment earlier in the night. Maybe she was making me comfortable as a guest in her room, which makes sense that given others who've slept in that bed have felt the sheets tighten around them like they were being tucked in. Or maybe that sense of like relaxation and calm kind of came over the whole house because Abby felt settled, like we'd recognized her communication. So, after 3 episodes detailing one of the most fascinating true crime cases and hauntings I've researched, and a whole season of ghost stories and supernatural encounters, I'm going to end it talking about Abby Borden. Because I believe she wanted to be heard and seen, and I'm going to honor that. She was obviously not liked by her own stepdaughters, painting her as the evil stepmother with ulterior motives to steal her husband's fortune. Before marrying Andrew, she was seen as a spinster, given the fact that she was unmarried in her early 30s. There's not much about her published beyond the murders. But, like women throughout history who have been placed in certain boxes, Abby was still a complex individual. In the Andrew and Abby suite, there's a little bedroom off to the side, which was actually her sewing room back in the day. She was known to be charitable and help neighbors in need. She helped with tasks around the home. Friends described her as kind, but not overly warm. And she was pragmatic with a no nonsense personality. I do like to believe there was something she wanted us to know that night, whether it was to provide answers about who killed her, or just to let us know that she's still there, going about her life as she would have when she was alive. If anything, this season taught me to remain open to the possibility that life continues after death. New England, you were magic. Thank you so much for listening to season 2 of Mirrors. I'll keep you posted about new episodes because I've got more questions. Until next time, stay spooky. This has been Mirrors, Horrors, History, and Hauntings. Produced and hosted by Gabby Hope Fry.